Hello and good afternoon. A very big welcome to the 98th year of AERA and the 2014 annual meeting in that wonderful city of sisterly and brotherly love, Philadelphia. I'm Barbara Schneider, the current president of AERA. This is our open plenary session, which can be accessed on the internet as AERA 2014 Open Plenary Session. Don't worry about uppercase. And for those on Twitter, the unique session hashtag is AERA Innovate. Our opening speaker is Dr. Teresa Sullivan, the 8th president of the University of Virginia, an accomplished scholar in labor force demography and productivity in higher education, having authored multiple books, journal articles, and publications. She also holds the esteemed position of Presidential Professor of Sociology. A highly regarded leader, she was the Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs for the University of Texas System, and then Provost, Executive Vice President for the Academic Affairs at the University of Michigan. Michigan State University, my university, is proud to claim her as one of our own, having received her undergraduate degree at Michigan State University's James Madison College. I got to know Terry through our mutual interest in sociology and our roots at the University of Chicago, where she received her doctoral degree. That is where I first learned of her commitment to rigorous social science research and her clear understanding of how social and political forces shape institutional productivity. Today, President Sullivan's address is titled A Pipeline of Innovation, Education from K-12 to College, that embodies the AERA theme this year, the power of education research for innovation in practice and policy. The ideal speaker for AERA's opening, President Sullivan is astutely leading her institution as it faces the challenges of higher education affordability and faculty compensation, and the race for technological change. Dedicated to high-quality instruction at all levels of the education system and access and opportunity for all students. Please join me in welcoming President Teresa Sullivan.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to deliver the opening plenary address for the 2014 annual meeting of the American Educational Research Association. I want to start by thanking all of you for your efforts to evaluate and improve teaching and learning in our PK through 12 schools and in our colleges and universities. Thomas Jefferson, who founded the University of Virginia 2 centuries ago, wrote frequently about the empowering effects of education. One particular phrase shows up again and again in his writings. Knowledge is power. Faculty, graduate and undergraduate students, and professionals working in research institutes, government agencies, and corporate and nonprofit education organizations. All of you together are generating new knowledge through your research and scholarship. The greater the rigor and quality of your science, the greater the power and impact of the knowledge you create as the influence of your work extends into the policymaking classroom and into the broader community. Thomas Jefferson also believed that education can be an instrument of equity. In an age of monarchy, he wanted to replace what he called the false aristocracy of wealth and privilege with a natural aristocracy based on virtue and talent. You advance this mission today as you work to close achievement gaps in education and level the playing field for students everywhere. Students across the country are the ultimate beneficiaries of your work, and the value of your education research can be measured by its generative effect in their lives. Thank you for all that you do. Now, in education circles, we speak frequently about the college pipeline or the education pipeline. We use these phrases to describe our broad national effort to foster student success at every level of education and to build an integrated system of effective PK through 12 schools, community colleges, and four-year colleges and universities. Today, I want to talk about another type of pipeline, one that symbolizes the connection between research, the creation of powerful knowledge, and real-world impact. This is the innovation pipeline in education research. Think of the innovation pipeline as a mutually reinforcing system of research initiatives that address every aspect of teaching and learning at every level of our schools, from pre-K through college, yielding innovative programs and policies for teachers and students at every one of these levels. In this innovation pipeline, education researchers are working now on a broad spectrum of issues, such as how to effectively measure teaching quality, how to interest students in the STEM fields, how to close the achievement gap between wealthy students and those from low-income families, how to assess the effectiveness of online learning, and many other complex issues. We cannot choose just one or two of the many problems in education to tackle. We need solutions for all of them. So all of these problems need to be connected to a pipeline that carries innovation produced by rigorous research and development. The innovation pipeline supports and improves the likelihood of success at every stage of the education pipeline. And ultimately, the education pipeline will succeed in its purpose of educating individuals and of strengthening society only to the extent that the innovation pipeline remains productive. So that is the topic I want to discuss further today. We should begin by acknowledging that assessment and evidence-based improvement of education in America is no longer a niche concern for academics and policymakers, if ever it was. In recent years, the efforts to measure and improve education have moved to the forefront of major societal issues we're working on to address in this country, along with our perpetual efforts to address poverty, unemployment, and other problems. Education plays an especially prominent role among these issues because we look to education for solutions to those other problems, such as poverty and unemployment. To be fair, we should also acknowledge the scale of the issue. American public education is a massive operation. Right now, more than 50 million students are enrolled in about 99,000 elementary and secondary schools in 13,600 public school districts across the country. Public school systems employ about 3.3 million teachers, full-time or full-time equivalent. About 22 million students are enrolled in college, of whom 16 million are enrolled in public 2- or 4-year colleges. When we consider strengthening the capacity of education to foster student learning and development, it's important to recognize the enormous human scope of the issue we face. This scale would increase even further if we were also to consider the private options to public schooling. Over the past 2 decades, many analysts have begun to proclaim that our public K-12 schools, and more recently our public higher education system, are in crisis. At first, it was provocative to say this. Then it became fashionable, and now it seems almost to be accepted as conventional wisdom. That perceived crisis in education has drawn attention from every sector. Government agencies, both federal and state, are working on it. Nonprofit organizations are working on it. The corporate sector is working on it. One positive result is that the federal government has boosted its investment in education, research, and innovation over the past 10 to 15 years. The U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences specifically structured its grant giving to encourage both the discovery of new ideas and the work that translates into tools that function at scale. As many of you know, IES has established 10 long-term programs related to research topics under its Education Research Grants Program. The topics relate to every facet of how schools promote student learning, such as cognition, educational technology, policy, the social context of classrooms, and the promotion of an effective workforce of teachers and leaders. Support from IES, NSF, and even NIH is funding and fostering education, research, and development at every level. This is the first section in the innovation pipeline, the creation of ideas and early-stage solutions in the form of curricula, assessments, and technology tools that come from university-based R&D funded by these agencies. As one result, we have a growing number of what we might call startups, programs that provide practical solutions, put tools in teachers' hands, and put tools directly into the hands of students. But too many of these solutions sit on the shelf because we don't have enough ways of moving these innovations out to larger applications while preserving their impact. And this is a gap in the innovation pipeline. Universities are stepping in to help. For example, a cluster of universities, including the University of Virginia, have begun to facilitate the process of moving startups to scale through partnerships with the private sector, business incubators, and government agencies. Historically, tech transfer has been much more involved with science-oriented fields such as biotechnology. The challenge now is to make tech transfer just as quick and seamless in education. Closing the gap in the education innovation pipeline will require investment in entities that can contribute to a highly functioning tech transfer system. The intensifying focus on education has resulted in rising demands for measurement and accountability. As a result, the demand for education R&D to generate knowledge with measurable impact is also rising. The conversation about accountability has dominated the discourse about K-12 education for more than 2 decades, and more recently, higher education has become a target for scrutiny and potential reform. My most recent research is focused on this issue of measuring productivity in higher education. A few years ago, I served as chair of the National Research Council panel on measuring higher education productivity, and I co-authored the report our panel produced. I will share some of our findings because they include lessons for educators at all levels, but also they include potential areas of further study by education researchers. In recent years, progressive cuts in state and federal support for colleges and universities, combined with rising tuition, have brought the question of productivity measurement to the forefront. Measuring productivity makes sense in the context of manufacturing, But it's much harder to define and quantify productivity when the output, rather than computers or cars, is the education of human beings. In the NRC report, we tried to outline some responsible steps that universities can take to put productivity measures in place while acknowledging the extent of the challenge. The panel quickly realized that a number of complexities characterize the measurement of higher education production processes. First, when attempting to measure productivity in education, we realized that not all of the good qualities of good teaching and research can be easily measured. Some aspects of the educational experience that create value nevertheless resist quantification by statistical measures. Another factor is joint production. Various units in colleges and universities generate a number of outputs, such as educated and credentialed citizens, research findings, hospital services, and so on. And the labor and other inputs cannot always be neatly allocated among those outputs. Another factor is the high variability in the quality and characteristic of the inputs, such as teachers and students, and the outputs, such as credits and degrees. Yet another factor is the outputs and the inputs that are completely non-market in nature. Productivity measurement for higher education is a work in progress in terms of its capacity to handle such complexities, because no single metric can handle everything that's important. Decision makers must appeal to a range of statistics or indicators when assessing policy options, and even then, assess the indicators within the context in which they were measured. Much of the NRC's panel discussion centered on the issue of quality. All of you are familiar with the Race to the Top program designed to spur innovation in K through 12 education. Our panel members had serious debates about whether quantitative measures of productivity in higher education, if not adjusted to reflect quality, would trigger a race to the bottom as institutions rushed to improve productivity and competed with each other to get there without adequate attention to academic quality. This is the problem of the diploma mill. Ultimately, we decided that we could not wait for a reliable output quality index to start measuring productivity. It's worth noting that the United States already has a quality assurance system in the form of regional and subject accreditation. Furthermore, tight budgets within our university have already put a high degree of pressure on quality. So the issue of quality is not being ignored, even if we cannot consistently measure it through productivity measures. In addition to implementing effective business practices, universities need to review existing academic programs from the perspective of quality, as well as cost effectiveness. Newer instructional methods such as cyber learning and hybrid courses that blend instructional technology with traditional classroom teaching may lead to such outcomes. To evaluate this hypothesis will require more education research on both the cost and the quality outcomes. The demand for assessment in PK through 12 and the demand for assessment, productivity, and return on investment in college education is ultimately a measurement of the impact of education. What is the impact of the knowledge a student acquires in PK through 12? What about skills and non-cognitive outcomes? What is the impact and ultimate value of a college degree? The answers to these questions begin with the work you do as education researchers. Rigorous research becomes the foundation for teaching that delivers the impact for our students. All of the conversation about crisis in public education and all the demands for accountability from PK through college, while seeming burdensome at times, have set the stage for a period of urgent innovation. As politician Rahm Emanuel once famously said, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." He said these words in November 2008 in the darkest days of the Great Recession, and he meant that a crisis creates a sense of urgency, and the urgency gives you the opportunity to do things you would not have been able to do before, to challenge old assumptions, to reassess conventional ways of doing things, to introduce new methods and ideas. And as a result of the rising demand for accountability that has accompanied this crisis, we've been given some measures, albeit crude measures in some cases, that allow us to test the impact of novel approaches. So let me share a few examples of education research leading to innovative programs and practices. As president of UVA, I am most naturally familiar with education research being conducted in our own Curry School of Education. In addition to being a leader in teacher education, the Curry School produces some of the nation's best evidence-based innovation. Some of these programs focus on improving teachers, some focus on student learning and behavior, others focus on policy reform. Some of them focus on PK through 12, while others focus at the college level. Together, they are connective pieces of the innovation pipeline. And while I know they are only illustrative, I think the illustration is valuable. Research conducted by UVA professor of reading education, Marcia Invernizzi, resulted in the creation of the Phonological Awareness Literacy Screening, known as PALS. This is an assessment for students' early literacy skills that provides customized learning experiences for students who are at risk of becoming poor readers. Developed in 1997 with funding from the Virginia Department of Education, PALS consists of 3 instruments: PALS Pre-K for preschoolers, PALS K for kindergartners, and PALS 1 through 3 for students in the 1st through the 3rd grades. In addition to these instruments, PALS Espanol K and PALS Espanol 1 through 3 are being developed in Spanish through another grant from the Institute of Education Sciences. PALS Espanol will help teachers distinguish between Spanish-speaking students who simply have delays in English language development and those who may have real reading difficulties. As I mentioned earlier, great teaching tools don't do any good if the tech transfer process breaks down and the tools do not reach the teachers and students who need them. Working with colleagues, Professor Invernizzi founded a company, the PALS Marketplace, to distribute PALS assessments and tools beyond Virginia. Today, PALS is used in schools in all 50 states in the U.S. PALS was developed with state support and pilot funds, transferred into an R&D enterprise for testing and validation, then moved to scale very quickly because of regulatory demands coming from states that had begun to require early literacy assessments. Researchers now hope to expand the PALS toolbox of assessments and teaching instruments to create seamless literacy screening and remediation at every level through 8th grade. In an example of collaborative innovation, faculty researchers from UVA's School of Education and our School of Engineering partnered with local schools in Charlottesville to establish the first U.S. laboratory school in advanced manufacturing. Through the lab school, engineering and education faculty and students work with school teachers to help students learn science using the latest 2D and 3D manufacturing technologies. This partnership provides students with advanced technical skills and training for high-tech jobs, and it helps our students and faculty in their professional training and research. Besides that, the kids think it's fun. The first lab school opened at one of our local middle schools last fall, and the team will soon open additional lab schools in other middle and high schools in the area. The lab school collaboration grew from seed funding from NSF and the Commonwealth of Virginia. This is an example of how government, universities, and K-12 school systems can partner in ways that are mutually beneficial and that meet a national need to prepare more students for high-tech jobs. The lab school shows how we can use innovation to create a prototype. The challenge will be to test and replicate the prototype and work on bringing it to scale. About a decade ago, UVA professor of education Robert Pianta began to see the need for innovation in the assessment of early childhood program quality. After a series of large longitudinal studies in early childhood education, he established the Center for Advanced Study of Teaching and Learning, or CASEL. Since the center's inception in 2006, Professor Pianta, who is now Dean Pianta of the Curry School, has worked with his team to develop multiple tools for the observation and assessment of teacher-student interactions. Those tools are designed for scale-up and extension across grades and subject areas. The goal of CASEL is ambitious: to improve student learning at every level of education, in every subject, by building better teachers based on the scientific study of effective teaching. As with the PALS program, the launch of CASEL coincided with increasing demands from state and federal regulatory infrastructure, including accountability measures built into the Head Start program. As a result, a set of assessment tools created at CASEL, the Classroom Assessment Scoring System, or CLAS, has been written into state and national regulations, including use in every Head Start classroom in the United States and increasingly worldwide. Like the PALS program, CASEL is another example of innovation supported by rigorous R&D, then moved quickly to scale. CASEL methods developed for K-12 students are now being used in CASEL HE, a version of the program customized for higher education under the direction of UVA professor Karen Inkelis. In the past, much of the research on college teaching and learning has fallen into one of two categories. One category, concerned with faculty development, aimed to develop innovations in pedagogy to improve teaching. The other category, concerned with institutional quality assurance, focused on student learning outcomes. Although these two areas are closely related, the respective areas of research have often remained in their silos. CASEL HE brings these two categories together by connecting the study of instructional practice to student learning outcomes. Research has shown that school-based programs to promote good behavior can have a positive effect in curbing school violence, bullying, and other behavioral issues among students that create an environment that's not conducive to learning. Catherine Bradshaw, professor and associate dean in the Curry School, has collaborated with colleagues on federally supported trials of school-based prevention programs, including the widely used Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports, or PBIS. PBIS program typically has 3 tiers. The first tier is a school-wide effort to teach all students about the behaviors that are expected of them. The other 2 tiers are directed towards students who have specific behavioral problems. In a study that was published in 2012, Bradshaw's research team looked at the effects of the school-wide approach. She and her colleagues followed 37 Maryland elementary schools that were randomly assigned either to start or to not start the PBIS program. Over 4 years, teachers filled out a checklist of classroom behavior for each of their students. The researchers found out that after 4 years, teachers at schools using the PBIS program reported less problem behavior, such as bullying, and they reported more positive behavior, such as sharing and cooperating. In other words, the study showed that behavioral interventions not only reduced bad behaviors, they can increase good behaviors. The PBIS program is now used in more than 20,000 schools around the country. And we know it works because we have the evidence to back it up. Instances of school violence, including shootings in school by students, have become a painfully common headline in recent years. Dewey Cornell, a UVA professor of education and clinical psychologist, is working with a team of faculty and students, conducting research on effective methods and policies for combating youth violence and for promoting school safety. Their work produced the Virginia Student Threat Assessment Guidelines, a set of strategies for administrators to use in responding to a threat of student violence. The guidelines prepare school-based teams to evaluate student threats and quickly resolve minor threats while taking appropriate action in the case of more serious threats. More than 1,000 Virginia schools and 2,700 schools in 14 states are now using the Virginia Threat Assessment Guidelines. Here again, we can see the pipeline at work. rigorous R&D leading to innovation, innovation leading to early stage impact, early stage results moving to scale. UVA's Curry School is also home to YouthNext, as in Youth Nexus, which is a multidisciplinary center in which faculty work together to promote healthy youth development. The program focuses on a wide variety of issues affecting youth development, including supportive relationships, health management, and civic engagement. The 30-some faculty members who are involved in YouthNext focus on competencies in young people rather than problems. In the process, they found that teenagers are much less troubled, angst-ridden, and problem-prone than many people seem to believe. A YouthNext study on school climate in 423 middle schools in Virginia revealed that students feel overwhelmingly positive about their teachers and their schools. Almost 80% said they like their school. Research revealed that teenagers who were given serious responsibilities, such as tutoring younger children or helping out in a soup kitchen, had higher test scores and fewer behavioral problems than those with no such responsibilities. Dropout and pregnancy rates among such students also declined by at least half. The research shows that most teenagers really want to be good and to do good. They just need motivation and guidance. Now we can use that evidence to build programs to support healthy youth development. YouthNext has played a critical tech transfer role, translating new findings from the science of adolescent development into the next stage of application and R&D. As the program moves R&D to scale by getting research results out into the mainstream of public awareness and by training the next generation of researchers in this field, the innovation pipeline grows. With tuition costs rising faster than the rate of inflation in colleges and universities across the country, keeping college affordable has become another top educational issue, especially for families in lower income brackets. Unfortunately, we know students from disadvantaged backgrounds face barriers to college enrollment. The federal government's Middle Class Task Force examined questions related to the struggles of middle and low income families and issued a report titled Barriers to Higher Education. Here are some of their key findings. Family income is a major determinant of college enrollment. While 78% of high school graduates from high-income families enrolled in college, only 63% and 55% enrolled from middle and low-income families, respectively. In addition to income barriers, information barriers keep many students from less affluent backgrounds out of college. This is because they lack the roadmap that could help them find their way to college. For example, low and middle income students frequently eliminate college's consideration based solely on sticker price, even before researching financial aid packages. Sometimes they don't know the financial aid packages even exist. Later in this meeting, AERA President Barbara Schneider will speak about the so-called college mismatch problem, the issue of low-income and minority students who choose to enroll in colleges that are less selective than the ones for which they qualify based on their grades and test scores. Research by UVA faculty members Sarah Turner and Ben Castleman is helping us understand how to effectively connect with lower-income students to break down the information barriers. One line of Professor Turner's research examines the reasons that high-achieving, low-income teens choose not to enroll in the nation's top colleges. And Professor Castleman's research is focused on the ways we can support prospective first-generation college students throughout their application process. Together, their research has provided a dual approach to helping talented students enroll. A study by Professor Turner and Professor Caroline Hawksby examined the effects of providing low-income, high-achieving high school seniors with information, including college application guidance, information about the cost of college, and a fee waiver for college applications. The authors reported that this intervention increased the proportion of students who applied to a selective institution from 55% to 67%, increased the number who were admitted to a selective institution from 30% to 39%, and increased the number who enrolled in a selective institution from 29% to 34% relative to a comparison group. Professor Castleman, recognizing that information barriers can keep some low-income students from following through on their plans to enroll for college, conducted a study of low-cost interventions. A sample of high school students received text messages during the summer after graduation to remind them of major tasks needed to be completed for enrollment and to offer peer mentoring. The results showed this summer counseling led to substantial improvements in both the rate and the quality of college enrollment. Once again, this is an R&D to innovation to scale pipeline at work. Partially based on this faculty research, we're developing a new admission outreach strategy at UVA. As part of this strategy, we plan to identify high-achieving students qualified for admission to UVA and send them personalized messages to explain the realities of college cost, need-based financial aid, and net price. We will continue to provide practical information and individualized guidance through the application and financial aid process. As another facet of this strategy, we're strengthening our partnerships with high schools in low-income areas with local and regional college access organizations that already work closely with at-risk students. We're providing opportunities for these students to visit UVA for free and arranging for them to meet with peer and faculty mentors. Considering the financial and personal benefits of college education for individuals, and considering the greater good that college-educated citizens contribute to society, we have an obligation to ensure that a college education remains available and affordable to people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. This will help us create the aristocracy of talent that Thomas Jefferson envisioned. Education researchers are helping us to build that new aristocracy. The innovative programs I talked about today were developed from research at UVA, but innovation producing research happens at many schools and research institutes everywhere in the country. We're still not completely successful at fostering the transfer of innovative solutions so that they have a broad impact at scale. We probably do a better job in biotechnology and engineering, mainly because we've been doing it for longer in those fields, although even there's much room for improvement. In education, we're in the process of inventing the institutional supports to enable the transfer of solutions. And we've come to realize that this requires intense focus and a specialized set of supports. Until we fully succeed in this effort, we're partially responsible for the gaps in the innovation pipeline. If all of us are committed to developing innovative programs and policies for education, we need to marshal all our forces and deploy all the methodologies available to us, qualitative as well as quantitative research, the best randomized control trials, as well as the best ethnographies, the best case studies, and so on. The challenges are many and of many different kinds, and therefore many different kinds of research are required. To limit ourselves to one method would be a fundamentally reductionist approach. Every form of rigorous research is constructive. Every bit of evidence helps. Every incremental improvement at every level of education is a step in the right direction. This is the constant, iterative process of innovation, the pipeline of innovation that you are building. Thank you for your commitment to this important work.
Thank you, President Sullivan. That was just superb. Teresa has agreed to take some questions from the audience, so we will have an opportunity for a Q&A. And you will notice, I believe there are, I can't see if there are, I believe there are mics. I see, yes, I do see a mic. Do I have someone to start? Well, why don't I just start with the first question here. So what has been, do you think, the hardest thing that you've had to face in terms of innovation at your institution?
Well, I think one issue that a lot of us in the leadership positions face is that there's also a gap in information between what we're actually doing and the assumptions that are made that we're not doing anything. And those assumptions get repeated by journalists who never bother to talk to you, by politicians who've not actually become acquainted with you, and by others who actually have an ideological agenda of their own to further. And if we can have the opportunity for a meaningful dialogue, I think we can often make the case that we're quite dedicated to innovation too. But in some political circles, it's a much better sell to say they are entrenched, they won't change, we have to blow up the whole system if we're ever going to get any results.
And now what about the new ideas that have come out with respect to affordability, like that President Obama has talked about in changing financial aid and affordability issues? What effect do you think that might have on?
One thing the administration has tried to do is a kind of consumer empowerment approach in which data becomes more available to parents and to students about graduation rates, about the cost of education, more information about loans, for example, and more information about outcomes. The problem with this has been not only are such data hard to come by and to be truly comparative, but the other problem is it's not clear the consumers are looking for this kind of information. That's one of the reasons Ben Castleman's research is so instructive to us. And so while I understand the reason for collecting and disseminating this information, I don't disagree with it. I do think that it poses some issues. Let me give you a great example, the graduation rate. Okay? So people who don't know how the graduation rate is measured normally assume that a high rate must be good. Well, a high rate is good for a certain type of institution that is four-year and residential and pretty selective. But over half of the graduates in the United States don't get counted in anybody's graduation rate. Something is fundamentally flawed with a graduation rate in which half the graduates aren't even represented. Well, parents and others who will be consumers of this new information may or may not know that. I think the solution to this would be to develop a better measure, but the graduation rate is already enshrined in federal law.
I don't understand why we have such a hesitant audience. We usually have people racing up to the microphones. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Lea Wasp Ramirez from Miami University. I love and I'm inspired by your examples of faculty who are making these amazing innovations and scaling them up. But I would have to say that such a small minority of faculty. What can you say to those of us who are impressed by this, don't know how to get there, or who are sort of entrenched with sort of promotion and tenure policies and feel like we're never going to make it?
Ooh, okay. Are you from Miami of Ohio or Miami in Florida?
Ohio.
Okay.
But we're just called Miami University.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask is because I think that states have a stake in this, and developing tech transfer at the state level is a possibility and would make a lot of sense in at least some of the states, so that each institution doesn't have to go out and reinvent the wheel. I can't help you with the tenure and promotion policies. I will tell you that even in engineering, the tenure and promotion policies are not necessarily favorable to tech transfer. And so at many schools, there's an issue about whether patents count and whether starting a startup company counts and so on. So those issues about what counts and what doesn't count are maybe best postponed until after you've received tenure. Unless you've got an exceptionally enlightened administration which already knows how to take account of those things. But that's one of the culture lags inside our own institution. We say we value this kind of innovation and bringing it up to scale, and yet we don't always find ways to reward it or even recognize it appropriately.
Thank you. Let's take this person over here and then come back over there, please.
Hi, I'm Patricia Jennings. I'm a new faculty at University of Virginia, the Curry School. I'm very happy to be part of your team. I moved to UVA from Penn State, where there's a really interesting innovation scaling up going on, which I just want people to know about. It's using the cooperative extension model to deliver interventions broadly statewide, which is going on in Pennsylvania right now. A lot of different interventions that have been developed for youth are now being spread across the state through the cooperative extension system, which I think is an interesting model.
I agree it's an interesting model, and that would work in a lot of states. Some states also have explicit urban extension programs, which would make the big city school systems part of the outreach effort as well. Thank you for telling me about that.
Yes, please.
Hi, President Sullivan. Thank you for a very insightful talk. I'm also alumni from University of Virginia. So my question is, since I'm a teacher trainer right now, so my school is being really stressed out by their assessment of pre-service teachers, like EDTPA. I'm not sure that impacts your school as well. So my question is, what kind of impact does the EDTPA assessment have on that innovative pipeline, and how does current school education is coping with it? Thank you.
Well, I'm not a good person to ask about how the Curry School is coping with it, but do let me talk a little bit about the general stress level that assessment tests raise. Again, I think there are at least some people in the regulatory community who appear to have an ideological agenda as they approach assessment. We don't have to have that agenda, and the assessment doesn't have to serve that agenda. I think all of us like to know how we're doing so that we can get better. It's the reason we carry pedometers when we walk. It's the reason we do all sorts of behaviors, because we would like to improve. So trying to put the positive rather than the punitive approach to assessments out there is one of the things that I think can help. As to your more specific question, I think there are Curry faculty here who would be always happy to talk to an alum and give you advice.
We'll go back, switch over here, and then go over to this side. Yes, please.
Yes, hi, Dr. Sullivan. My name is Eric Stevenson. I'm not from the University of Virginia. I'm currently at the University of Pacific, but I commend UVA for really two things that I think are really innovative, and it's its leadership in the field of social entrepreneurship and programs like Semester at Sea. So my question really stems from, at the University of Pacific, could you provide any guidance to universities that maybe don't support two really innovative and becoming more prevalent programs like social entrepreneurship and Semester at Sea, and how do you infuse innovation into a campus climate?
That's a really good question. And so let me say that every program you've already got has its own constituency. And one of the issues with anything that is innovative, especially in a time when budgets are not growing, is that it'll always be posed in a zero-sum context. So I think you can be most effective in advocating for some particular kind of position when you are able to suggest that the pie will grow, that you'll be able to do things that you otherwise couldn't do that would attract something to the University of Pacific that they want, whether that's reputation, whether that's more students, whether that's a higher quality of teacher, whatever it is. You need to have some buy-in at multiple levels that innovation is a good thing. There are also multiple constituencies advocating different innovations, and so you have to be part of that process for talking about why your innovation really makes sense. But I think that one of the reasons that we have been successful at UVA has been, at least in part, that there's been a great openness among faculty to continuing to learn from each other. You know, one important form of diversity available at a college campus is that we interact with people whose disciplinary training is different from our own. And we share ideas, and I think many of the best ideas that we've developed at UVA have come exactly out of that kind of ferment of ideas from people interacting with each other. The nature of social organizations is that when the resources begin to decline, the internal organizational structures, the silos, get thicker. And so, without noticing it, a lot of us now in institutions where the silos are a lot thicker and harder to penetrate than they used to be, makes it less fun, less intellectually exciting for all of us, but also makes it harder to come up with the innovation. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, over here, please.
Thank you very much for the very inspirational talk. My name is Ingrid Schoen from Institute of Education in London, and I was wondering about the role of vocational training within the educational hierarchy, given that only 40% of young people complete a university degree, and we need a highly skilled and productive workforce. What is the role and the future or the vision for vocational training?
You know, it's a great question, and I'm not sure that we've got a good answer to it yet in the United States, but I can tell you some directions of thinking that I see. So I talked about the advanced manufacturing lab school that we're developing. Well, that's intended to prepare students to go in several directions. They might go to college and get an engineering degree, but they could also go to community college and get training in a technical field. We're talking now in the Commonwealth of Virginia about developing an apprentice academy, which would be for students who want to go into a skilled craft, but don't know how to learn about it. We have a highly successful example of an apprenticeship program at the Newport News shipbuilding facility. And people compete for years to try and get into that apprentice academy because it's so popular and provides such useful and immediately relevant skills. I think that that's going to be something that we could learn from Europe about. Certainly apprenticeship programs in countries like Germany are much more highly articulated than they are here in the U.S.
Yes, please.
Hello, President Sullivan. My name is Jack Zevin, Queens College, City University of New York. I'd like to go back to a colleague's earlier question about the EdTPA. One is that it seems to me, well, my student teachers are suffering from it right now, and they're quite bent out of shape over the whole thing. But it seems to me that it's producing precisely the opposite effect, even though it's claimed to be totally research-based, even though on a rather narrow research basis, I think. But that seems to be killing all innovation that I can see. And, you know, I'm a specialist in creative teaching. So I'd like to hear your comment on that.
Well, one part of good research, of course, is reporting adverse results. We used to think our mumps vaccine was successful until we started seeing young adults get the mumps on our college campuses. And then we found out that although we had clinically tested that vaccine, it didn't work that well. So continuing to report adverse effects, I think, is valuable. And, I think that one of the tenets of good science is it's always provisional, can always be revised. So if something like this isn't working and you have the evidence for it, I think that can be its own valuable contribution to the innovation pipeline. Maybe something better should be developed to replace it.
Yes, please.
Thank you, President Sullivan. I'm from the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm curious if you think there is a future sustainable business model for MOOCs, and if so, if you see them providing benefit to the institutions residentially and to the students enrolled at a place that is offering MOOCs externally across the world.
Sure. We have about 16 MOOCs at UVA, so we've been experimenting with this too. I will tell you that the benefit to our students at the university was that when we offered a MOOC externally, we often had a coordinated class going with it at the university. And these students weren't necessarily taking the material. In some cases, they had already taken the class, and they were doing more advanced work. In other cases, they were doing work that was really collateral or research-based about the MOOC itself. When we first were considering MOOCs, Mary Sue Coleman, the president of the University of Michigan, called me and told me about her experience talking to undergraduates at Michigan who had been in these collateral classes and told her they were the best learning experience they'd had while they were at Michigan. So that's kind of interesting. As for MOOCs being a money-making device, it is certainly likely that somebody is going to try and develop a way to do that. We have some reservations about it for lots of reasons. One of those reasons is the issues of honesty in who's actually taking and getting credit. Our School of Business is experimenting with something like a MOOC, except it's not massive, it's relatively small, and it will have a tuition charge associated with it, but it will be run much more like a small class, a discussion class, rather than a large class. However, those students will be external and they will be non-credit seeking. They're going to be executive education students. I think there are a lot of potentials here with it. One that we're using a lot is outreach to our alumni. Our alumni tell us that they feel very connected to the university in some ways, but the way they'd like to be more connected is intellectually. And so we've developed some MOOCs that were really aimed at our alumni as a way to help them re-experience some of our best teachers and enjoy what those teachers have to teach them. Last semester, Larry Sabato, political scientist at Virginia, offered a MOOC on the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination and how the Kennedy legacy had affected all subsequent presidencies. This semester, we've been offering Peter Onuf's course on the age of Jefferson. Courses that we deliberately offered, and advertised to our alumni as a way to keep them attached to us. I think MOOCs do a lot of things for universities, including branding. I think seeing them as a panacea to every affordability issue is probably a mistake. There are plenty of online opportunities for degrees these days. It's not that there's no way to do that. But I think MOOCs do offer some other things that, approached in an experimental vein, are exciting, and I know that the faculty who have taught them for us have been really energized by the effect and have told me we'll never teach the same way again. And that all by itself could be a reason for investing in one.
Yes, Joyce?
Yes, President Sullivan, your talk was very inspiring. I'm Joyce King from Georgia State University, and I'm president-elect of AERA, so welcome. I was very intrigued by the examples you gave of taking research that's sponsored within the university with external funding to R&D, and I think those would be privately funded activities with products that are marketed on the open market. So I'm interested in policies that you might have with respect to intellectual property and ownership of intellectual property developed by faculty members while working at the institution, and then taking that to scale or to another level, but in a more market-oriented strategy. Thank you.
Okay. That's a good question, and of course it comes up in tech transfer of all types. First of all, let me say that I don't think the R&D has to be just private money, although private money is certainly welcome. In our case, several of the projects I mentioned have had either state or federal support with them, including in support in trying to go to scale. So I don't think it's always just a matter of bringing in the private investor. I do think that the IP issues need to be considered carefully before you enter into this process of tech transfer. I don't think it's right to deprive the faculty members who have done the creative work of the return, if indeed there be any return. But that needs to be spelled out in advance in a policy. If there is also considerable university investment, I think it's also fair that the university have an opportunity to collect some of the money that comes in profits so that we can continue to fund other tech transfer. But I think particularly in the educational area, a lot of the work that goes to scale may not even be profit-making. It may instead be more or less in the public domain, but going to scale means finding ways to have people understand its value, understand the pros and cons of adopting it, and have the means to get the tools or whatever the product itself is. I think there'll be a whole range in the education field of for-profit, not-for-profit, hybrid models, and all kinds of different funding mechanisms brought to it. We're very, very early in this. You know, it's not something we can just take wholesale from the engineering school and adapt to the education school. I think it's going to take a lot more thinking about that. But I can tell you this, the engineering school does have that IP policy ready. And so they can give you an idea of what that might look like.
Yes, this gentleman over here, please.
I'm Wayne Padover from National University in La Jolla, California. Again, thank you for your remarks here today. My question is about educational leadership and wondering what is it, strategies, practices that pre-K-12 educational leaders might learn from higher educational leaders?
Well, I think one thing that people may not always recognize is how many different constituencies there are for leadership in education. Most of you are in a college or university setting, so you're aware of all the different constituencies that are there and clamoring for attention. But increasingly, our school districts have many constituencies as well. Think about realtors, for example. Realtors tend to be really well informed about what's going on with schools because that's something that their potential clients always want to know about. So a principal who comes into a school community and doesn't understand everybody who's in that community will be at a distinct disadvantage and will find out through hard experience who all these other people are. Now, that's not to say you can't ever do anything. Of course you can, but it may mean the consensus building includes talking with people you hadn't thought about talking to before, not only within the school district itself, but also outside the school district, including neighbors of the school, the local chamber of commerce, obviously parent groups, but also potential parents who maybe haven't decided whether to put their child in a public school or in an alternative school. Maybe that's been the biggest thing I've learned as university president, is just how many constituencies compete for your attention. And it's not possible to satisfy them all, but it is possible to listen for the deepest common values among them, to articulate those values, and then to use that to move towards solutions which, while they won't satisfy everybody, may satisfy the greatest number of your constituents and do the most good for your school.
Thank you. Okay, we've got two more. Yes, please.
Hey, thank you. It was very inspiring talk, so thank you very much. I am Aybike from NYU, and my question is, you have mentioned the innovation pipeline and education pipeline, and what should School of Educations to combine these two pipelines together and create a stronger pipeline for future of education? Because startup spirit is not in education's field so much. Wherever you go, like in business, there are a few people who has education background and doing something for education.
Right.
So thank you.
This is not a trivial issue. It is true that the expertise that we often need to move up to scale is an expertise that wasn't in the disciplinary background of a lot of us. It's one of the advantages of being at a university. It's the advantage of being able to walk over to the business school and talk to somebody who knows something more about this, or to talk to a medical school researcher who's had the experience of a startup, or to talk to somebody in your vice president for research office who knows a lot about intellectual property. And this is what we will have to do if we're going to be successful at this. It's great to do our studies and to publish them in our journals so that our colleagues are aware of them. But to have a greater policy-making impact, we'll have to change our behavior. We'll have to think about new ways of doing it if we want to really make the innovation pipeline something that applies to education and not just something that applies to biotechnology and a few other fields. And I don't think it'll be easy. I think it will take a lot of hard work. Your provost and your council of deans might be a good place to start.
And our last question, yes, please.
Hi, my name is Rihanna Shah, and I'm an undergraduate at Swarthmore College. I had a more ideological question. I was wondering, what would you say is the role of teaching students critical thinking, especially when they're in the future going to go into education, or kind of including the whole idea of critical thinking within pedagogy itself?
Well, I believe at least at the college level, we see critical thinking as one of the outcomes of a good college education. And there are pedagogies that seek deliberately to teach it, but I think that for many years it was a pretty reliable outcome for a lot of students just by virtue of being exposed to higher-powered intellectual discussions in classrooms, being exposed to more subjects, being exposed to more points of view they otherwise might not have heard. And there may also be a developmental aspect of going from age 18 to 22 that's also involved in greater critical thinking. I don't see this as an ideological issue, really. I think that there are some people who, perhaps see critical thinking as a code language for something else, but I see it as a code language for higher order learning objectives, and consider that generally to be benign and something that a well-educated citizenry needs to have.
Thank you, and if everyone would please join me in applauding really this superb talk, these excellent insights, and I think this has been really just a great opening to our meeting, it bringing together these issues about innovation, the challenges that we face when we have to think about, are we going to take things to scale or not? And this whole story about what's going on at the University of Virginia, I know that there are similar stories going on among many of the institutions of people that are represented here today, and I hope that we get to hear about them all in the meetings, and I'm looking forward to coming to sessions and meeting many of you. And I really think that it has been very inspiring, and these were really a great talk. So thank you again, President Sullivan.
Thanks.
Thank you
Good.
so much. It was just great.
Good. I hope it got you off to a good start.
Oh, you sure did.